Picture yourself in Philadelphia. You're walking down a street lined with houses that share walls, brick, 3 stories, a stoop out front, a small stretch of sidewalk separating you from your neighbor's front door. Block after block, mile after mile, the same rhythm repeating. Now picture Copenhagen, or Amsterdam, or a residential street in London. Same idea. Attached houses, shared walls, a whole neighborhood built shoulder to shoulder. Now drive through almost any American suburb built after 1960. Detached houses. Side yards. 6 feet of grass nobody uses separating you from a neighbor you've never spoken to. Something happened to the row house in America, and it wasn't an accident. It was a decision, made on purpose, and it reshaped how tens of millions of people live without most of them ever realizing it. Row houses weren't rare in America. They were normal. Baltimore, Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Boston, entire cities were built almost exclusively out of attached housing well into the 20th century. It made sense. Shared walls meant less material, less heat loss, cheaper construction per unit. A row house let a city pack thousands of families into walking distance of jobs, shops, and transit without wasting an inch of land. In 1930, if you lived in an American city, there was a real chance your house touched your neighbors on at least one side. Then, after World War II, everything about how America built housing changed at once. 12 million veterans came home and needed places to live immediately. The federal government stepped in through the Federal Housing Administration and the GI Bill, guaranteeing mortgages to make homeownership affordable at massive scale. And here's the detail almost nobody talks about. The FHA's own underwriting manual explicitly favored detached single-family homes. Row houses, attached housing, anything that shared a wall with a neighbor, was treated as a higher lending risk, harder to insure, harder to finance. If you wanted the government-backed loan that made a house affordable, that loan was steering you toward a detached house on its own lot, not a row house downtown. At the same time, local governments were rewriting the rules of what could legally be built. Zoning codes that emerged across the country in the post-war decades didn't just permit detached single-family housing. In enormous stretches of the country they made it the only legal option. Minimum lot sizes. Mandatory setbacks from the street. Required side yards on every property. A row house, by definition, has no side yard. It shares a wall. Under the new zoning maps sweeping across American suburbs, that made the row house illegal to build in the very places most new housing was going up. It wasn't that builders stopped wanting to build row houses. In huge parts of the country, they legally couldn't anymore. Compare that to Europe, where cities had grown dense for 1,000 years before the automobile ever existed and land inside city walls had always been expensive and limited. Attached housing wasn't a compromise. It was simply how you built a functional city when space was scarce. Post-war European rebuilding, even after the devastation of the war, largely continued that pattern: dense, walkable, attached. There was no equivalent of the FHA manual pushing millions of families toward detached houses on quarter-acre lots. There was no zoning revolution outlawing shared walls. The economic and legal pressure that reshaped American housing simply didn't exist there in the same form. Here's the part that changes how you see every American suburb you've ever driven through. The shift away from row houses wasn't really about what people wanted. Surveys from the era show plenty of Americans were perfectly happy in dense urban rowhouse neighborhoods. It was about what got financed and what got legalized. Detached houses became cheap and easy to build because the loans favored them and the zoning demanded them. Row houses became difficult and often outright illegal to build because neither the money nor the law supported them anymore. When something becomes dramatically easier to finance and legal to build in only one form, that form becomes the default, and within a generation, people forget it was ever a choice at all. The costs of that choice took decades to become visible. Detached single-family sprawl meant more roads, more pipes, more electrical lines per household, all of it paid for and maintained by cities with a shrinking tax base per mile of infrastructure. A block of row houses generates far more property tax revenue per acre than the same land covered in widely spaced detached homes, while costing the city far less to service. Economists studying municipal finance have found that this mismatch, low-density housing outpacing the tax revenue needed to maintain the infrastructure it requires, is a major reason so many American cities and suburbs quietly struggle with long-term budget shortfalls. We built our neighborhoods in the shape that was easiest to finance in 1950, and we're still paying the maintenance bill for that shape today. There's a human cost too, one that's harder to put a number on. Row houses put your front door 12 feet from the sidewalk and your neighbor's front door 12 feet from that. You see people. You know their names. In a fully detached suburb, with the garage facing the street and the yard facing away from it, you can live somewhere for a decade and recognize almost no one. Urban planners have pointed to this for years. The physical shape of a street either produces casual daily contact between neighbors or it engineers people out of ever encountering each other at all. Row houses didn't guarantee community, but they made it structurally easier to happen by accident. Some American cities never fully lost the pattern. Parts of Philadelphia, Baltimore, Brooklyn, and Washington, D.C. kept building attached housing well past the 1950s, and today those rowhouse blocks are often some of the most expensive, most in-demand real estate in their entire metro areas. That's the twist nobody expected. The housing type that federal policy quietly discouraged for 70 years turned out to be exactly what a new generation of buyers is now willing to pay a premium for: walkable, dense, full of neighbors they actually know. So the row house didn't disappear from America because people stopped wanting to live close to each other. It disappeared because in one specific decade, the money and the law both pointed toward detached houses on private lots, and almost nobody building a suburb in 1955 was thinking about what that would mean for a city's budget or a neighborhood's sense of connection 70 years later. We built a country optimized for privacy and space, and only much later started noticing what it cost us in everything a shared wall used to give away for free. Next time you walk down a street of row houses, or drive through a neighborhood where every house sits alone on its own patch of grass, ask yourself which one actually feels more like a place, and which one just feels like real estate. Would you trade your side yard for a neighbor 12 feet away? Drop your answer in the comments.